Welcome everyone to the Apothecary Tales, the basics of pharmacology. So today I'll be discussing about one big class of drugs, that is the diuretics. And I'll be explaining it in two videos. So the first part will be having the basic introduction about the diuretics and the normal regulation of fluid and electrolytes by the kidneys. And the second part will give you an idea regarding the different classes of the diuretics, their mechanisms, their adverse drug reactions, their therapeutic uses and so on. So I want you guys to watch both these videos to get a clear idea regarding the diuretics. So let's just start with the introduction of diuretics. So what are these diuretics? These are the drugs that increase the volume of urine being excreted. And most of these diuretic agents are the inhibitors of the renal ion transporters that would decrease the reabsorption of sodium at different sites in the nephron. Due to this inhibition, the sodium and other ions such as the chloride enter the urine greater than normal amounts along with water, which is carried passively to maintain the osmotic equilibrium. Thus, these diuretics would increase the volume of the urine and often change its pH as well as the ionic composition of the urine and blood. In addition to these renal ion transport inhibitors, the other types of diuretics include the Osmotic Diuretics, aldosterone antagonist, and Carbonic Anhydrase inhibitors. The main indications of the diuretics includes the edema and hypertension. So before looking into the normal regulation of fluid and electrolytes by the kidneys, first we'll look into the various types of the diuretics. It includes thiazide and related diuretics, loop diuretics, potassium sparing diuretics, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, and the osmotic diuretics. Now let's talk about the normal regulation of fluid and electrolytes by the kidneys. We know that kidney is one of the main organs of elimination, and the functional unit of kidney is the nephron. Approximately 16 to 20% of the blood plasma entering the kidneys is filtered from the glomerular capillaries into the Bowman's capsule. And this filtrate, although is normally free of proteins and blood cells, contains most of the low molecular weight plasma components in concentration similar to that in the plasma, and basically consists of glucose, sodium bicarbonate, amino acids and other organic solutes, as well as the electrolytes such as sodium, potassium and chloride. And it is the responsibility of the kidney to regulate the ionic composition and volume of urine by active reabsorption or secretion of ions and or the passive reabsorption of water at 5 functional zones along the nephron. And these zones are the proximal convoluted tubule, the descending loop of Henle, the ascending loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule, the collecting tubule and duct. So first is the proximal convoluted tubule. This is actually located in the cortex of the kidney, and almost all the glucose, bicarbonate, amino acids and other metabolites along with 2/3 of the sodium are being reabsorbed at this site. In order to maintain the anion gap, chloride enters the lumen of the tubule in exchange for an anion such as oxalate as well as paracellularly through the lumen. Water follows passively from the lumen to the blood to maintain the osmolar equality. If not for extensive reabsorption of solutes and water in the proximal tubule, the mammalian organism would have rapidly been dehydrated and failed to maintain the normal osmolarity. If you observe, there is a sodium-potassium ATPase pump located in the proximal convoluted tubule. This is responsible for the sodium reabsorption into the interstitium, thereby maintaining the normal levels of sodium and potassium in the cell. Carbonic anhydrase in the luminal membrane and cytoplasm of the proximal tubular cells is responsible for modulating the reabsorption of the bicarbonate. So we'll be talking about the carbonic anhydrase inhibitor in our next video. That we'll get to know more about this role. Now we're talking about certain secretory systems present in the proximal tubule. It has got the organic acid secretory systems and the organic base secretory systems. The organic acid secretory system is located in the middle third of the proximal tubule, and is responsible for secreting a variety of organic acids which include uric acid, some antibiotics and diuretics from the bloodstream into the proximal tubular lumen. Most of the diuretics are delivered to the tubular fluid via this system. The organic acid secretory system is saturable and diuretics in the bloodstream compete for transfer with endogenous organic acids such as uric acid. One such interaction is an interaction between the probenecid and penicillin. Probenecid is a uricose uric drug that is used in the treatment of hyperuricemia or gout, which increases the excretion of uric acid. So what happens in this interaction between probenecid and penicillin secretion is that probenecid will increase the secretion of uric acid. And this uric acid will hence compete with penicillin for the organic acid secretory system. Hence the penicillin secretion is decreased. Now talking about the organic base secretory system, which is located in the upper and middle segments of the proximal tubule. And it is mainly responsible for the secretion of creatinine and choline. Next we're talking about the descending loop of Henle. The remaining filtrate coming from the proximal convoluted tubule is isotonic in nature. This will enter the descending limb of the loop of Henle and passes into the medulla of the kidney. The osmolarity increases along the descending portion of the loop of Henle because of the countercurrent mechanism that is responsible for water reabsorption. This results in a tubular fluid with a threefold increase in the salt concentration. So in other words, if I try to explain, the filtrate coming from the PCT is isotonic, that is, equal concentration of the salt and water. As it goes down through the descending loop of Henle, which is permeable to water. Permeable to water means it allows the reabsorption of water into the cells. So what happens? Water reabsorption occurs from the isotonic solution. So the water reabsorption occurs and this causes an increased buildup of the salt concentration. Thereby the osmolarity of the filtrate increases. So this is what happens in the descending loop of Henle. And the osmotic diuretics exert the part of their action in this region. Next is the ascending loop of Henle. Cells of the ascending tubular epithelium are unique in nature that they are impermeable to water. That means no more water reabsorption. Whereas to maintain the osmolarity, there is an active reabsorption of sodium, potassium and chloride, which is mediated by the sodium-potassium 2 chloride co-transporter. At the same time, both the magnesium and calcium enter the interstitial fluid via the paracellular pathway. The ascending loop of Henle is basically referred as the diluting region of the nephron because approximately 25 to 30% of the tubular sodium chloride returns to the interstitial fluid, hence maintaining the high osmolarity. And the diuretics acting at this site is the loop diuretics and has the greatest diuretic effect because this is the major site for the salt reabsorption. Next, coming to the distal convoluted tubule. Similar to the ascending loop of Henle, the cells of the distal convoluted tubule are also impermeable to water. About 10% of the filtered sodium chloride is again reabsorbed via a sodium chloride transporter that is sensitive to thiazide diuretics. Therefore, the diuretics that is exerting its action at the distal convoluted tubule is the thiazide diuretics. Along with the sodium chloride reabsorption, the calcium reabsorption is mediated by the passage through a channel and then transported by a sodium-calcium exchanger into the interstitial fluid. The mechanism thus differs from that in the loop of Henle. Additionally, the calcium excretion is usually regulated by the parathyroid hormone in this portion of the tubule. So that means sodium, chloride and calcium reabsorption takes place at the distal convoluted tubule. Now moving on to the collecting tubule and the duct. Here we can see two types of cells, that is the principal cells and the intercalated cells. Principal cells are responsible for the sodium, potassium and water transport, whereas the intercalated cells affect the H+ secretion. The sodium enters the principal cells through channels known as the epithelial sodium channels. Once inside the cell, sodium reabsorption relies on the sodium-potassium ATPase pump to be transported into the blood. That means sodium enters from the lumen to the cells via the sodium channels and then from cells to the blood via the sodium-potassium ATPase pump. Aldosterone receptors in the principal cells influence the sodium reabsorption and potassium secretion. Aldosterone plays a very important role in this reabsorption synthesis. The aldosterone further potentiates the increase in the sodium reabsorption by increasing the synthesis of sodium channels and of the sodium-potassium ATPase pump. Now, the antidiuretic hormone receptors will promote the reabsorption of water from the collecting tubules and the ducts. The diuretics acting at this site is the potassium-sparing diuretics. So in conclusion, if we try to see the movement of the electrolytes in water, we can see from the proximal tubule there is a reabsorption of sodium, potassium and water along with glucose amino acids by carbonates. As it comes to the ascending loop of Henle, sodium, potassium, chloride gets reabsorbed. In distal convoluted tubule, chloride and sodium. And in the collecting tubule and duct, sodium and water reabsorption occurs with the secretion of H+ and potassium ions. Talking about the excretion, the organic acid and base secretory system secrete a variety of organic acids, including most diuretic drugs from the bloodstream into the lumen of the proximal tubule, and at the collecting duct and tubule, the H+ and K+ secretion occurs, and that is mainly governed by the aldosterone. So in order to summarize, in this first part video of the diuretics, we have learned about what is diuretics, indications of diuretics, different classes of diuretics which includes thiazide and related diuretics, lobe diuretics, potassium-sparing diuretics, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors and osmotic diuretics. And finally we discussed about the normal regulation of fluids and electrolytes by the kidneys. So I hope you have understood clearly about it. So if any comments or suggestions, please do mail in us. Thank you.